Amat merat ike tesolderat igmerut.
Hey all, Dave here. Welcome to the final video in this series. There are only 6 questions left, so this video will be a little shorter than the others. There isn't really much more to add as an introduction here. I'll just mention that I'm about to start scripting an introduction to epistemology series, as well as an introduction to the philosophy of the self series, so expect to see them soon. Anyway, on with the questions. Question 51. What do you think is the most important thing atheists can do to improve their public image? Okay, so I think this one goes a little bit deeper and is a little bit more complex than just what atheists can do to improve their public image. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of things that contemporary atheists do that I have criticisms about. There are many atheists online that I have plenty of complaints about. There is lots of aggression, many are constantly looking for arguments, there is lots of atheists online that speak of theists being mentally ill, lots of unearned confidence about how well informed they are, and much, much more. There are some arguments that can be made for why some atheists behave like this, but I don't think these arguments actually do defend all of the behaviors we see online successfully. Lots of it is simply driven by human nature and by the same things that drove those people while they were religious. They've dropped the religion but kept the religious nature of their thinking. Working on these things may have a slim chance of improving the image of atheists. However, I also think that's somewhat unlikely in lots of cases. Like I say, there are plenty of atheists I meet online that I most certainly do have a problem with, but I don't think it's entirely on atheists that we have a public image problem. Here in Europe, there is no public image problem with atheists, at least not at a general societal level. Most people here simply are atheists, and therefore public perception of atheists is pretty normal. It is within certain groups, usually religious groups, that the negative public image exists in. In a lot of cases, it wouldn't matter how atheists behave though, because the image of atheists is created from within those certain religious groups and certain religious communities. Just as there are many atheists that see religious people as mentally deficient or unable to think critically and logically, the same attitude exists within many religious people too, just directed at atheists. And just as much of this thinking about religious people is reinforced among atheists through attitudes, the same is true of religious people reinforcing attitudes about atheists. In the USA, there is an industry geared towards painting atheists as people in rebellion or being anti-American or just wanting to sin and being unable to see the truth. So it wouldn't really matter what atheists do to improve their public image among many of these people, because they are seen as the outsider, and they are used to reinforce beliefs about the in-group. They are painted as the enemy and painted as traitors for the sake of the bond of the community that these ideas are pushed in. There are apologists like Randall Rouser who work very hard to improve the image of atheists among Christians. But for every Randall Rouser, there are 50 Matt Powells and Frank Turek's and Pat Robertsons. And as long as it's profitable or good for business and useful, any effort from atheists is much like the task of Sisyphus. Though as I said, there is still much that many online atheists can do to improve their own behavior as well. Question 52. What do you think is the best way to argue with someone religious? That really depends on the person in question. For some, there is no good way to argue with them, and there simply is no point in arguing with them. Atheists and agnostics would be better off doing something more useful, like watching paint dry, unless they're looking for content for a channel or a social media site, or someone to point and laugh at, or use to make themselves feel superior in some way. For others, it's better to just have a discussion with them. Ask them about what they believe and why they believe it, and explain why you don't believe it. It all depends on what the purpose of engaging with them is, I guess. There is no single best way to argue with anyone about anything. If someone is looking for a best way, then the best thing I can suggest is to study the Socratic method and the psychology of changing someone's mind. Those are great foundations to start from. Question 53. Is there anything else you would like to add about atheism or your experiences as an atheist? Not really. My experience today is very different to my experience as a teenager as far as atheism goes, and my experience with people in Europe is very different to my experience with people from the USA. Just as is my experience with Muslims and Christians, and different Muslims and different Christians. The same could be said of my experience with other atheists also. My choice of definition of atheism, atheist, and agnostic are seen in different ways by different atheists. Some are incredibly hostile, and some agree with them. There is no particular unifying experience when it comes to being an atheist, at least for me anyway. Like with any other identifying label, when it comes to humans and society, it's all very intersectional. There are those who suffer far more for being an atheist than I do. If you ask an ex-Muslim what their experience as an atheist is, that will be very different to an ex-Christian, even if both come from somewhere like the UK, and even more so if the ex-Muslim lives somewhere like Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, where it carries some very real threats of violence. Question 54. What should I do if I want to learn more about atheism? I'd say speak to as many atheists as possible, from as many walks of life as possible. Ask them how they define atheism and see atheism, and ask them why they think the way they do. And do so with the intent of understanding their views, rather than just challenging their views. Atheists are a very mixed bunch, especially in contemporary times. You could also check out the numerous YouTube channels dedicated to atheism and promoting atheism. Look at philosophers like Graham Oppy or Stephen Law, or Julian Baggini, Paul Draper, J.L. Schellenberg, and the like who promote atheism. After doing that, you should also check out some popular and not so popular apologists who spend their time maligning atheists, so you can get a feel for the difference between how many of them treat atheists and atheism, and how atheists and atheism actually are. You'll see a difference between how they are portrayed and how they actually are, and you'll probably also find some that fit the bill of how they're portrayed and that many more do not. Question 55. Can you recommend any good books or resources on atheism? There's a few I would recommend, especially as an introductory thing. The first one I'd recommend is A Very Short Introduction to Atheism by Julian Baggini. It's a really short book and an introduction to atheism. The title of the book is pretty descriptive. I don't actually own a physical copy of this one myself, so you'll see a picture of it somewhere on screen. It discusses some of the popular arguments for atheism and discusses what atheism is. Another book in the same vein is Atheism and Agnosticism by Graham Oppy. This one here. This covers much of the same stuff as Julian Baggini's book, but in a slightly more detailed way. And it also discusses various forms of agnosticism. Another great book as an introduction to atheism is Kerry Walter's Atheism, A Guide for the Perplexed. This one here. This is an excellent resource and discusses the history of atheism along with many of the topics covered in the previous two, but from a slightly different angle. And finally, I would recommend 50 Voices of Disbelief, Why We Are Atheists. This one here. This is a collection of 50 papers and chapters, all quite short, and all from various atheists discussing why they either do not believe or believe that God does not exist. There are some excellent arguments for atheism in here, as well as discussions about atheism and the experience of some atheists. Not only would I recommend these books to believers though, I'd also highly recommend them to other atheists, especially those that have recently left religion or have been embedded in online atheism for a long time. Question 56. Do you have any questions for me about my beliefs? As I'm responding to a website and an online list, rather than a real person who can respond back? No. Instead, I'll turn this around to you watching this video. Are there any questions that you, the viewer, have for me? Leave them down in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. And here we are, at the end of Enlightio's 56 questions for atheists. I gotta admit, that was a lot of fun. Probably not for you, but it was for me. I'm very glad I broke it down into parts though, as that would have been a lot of work answering them all in one go. Might have worked as a stream, I guess, but I think it probably worked better in this format. Like I've said during a couple of the other videos, I'm going to go back and expand on some of my answers and some of the questions involved in individual videos. Some of them are pretty big questions and they deserve bigger answers. If there's anything you want me to expand on in particular, feel free to hit me up in the comments with them. Or if there's any other questions for atheist lists you want me to tackle, or videos you want me to respond to, then let me know that in the comments as well. Until the next time, take care. See you soon, and I hope life treats you well until then. Bye.